In this video we will look at global business. A global industry can be defined as an industry in which firms must compete in all world markets for that product to survive. So it's a product that no single domestic market can have sufficient demand to enable the product to survive. It must operate on a global scale if it's going to survive. That is a truly global business. The product must be sold globally in order for the business to survive. That's truly a global business. If the market is less than that, the product will not survive. An industry in which a firm's competitive advantage depends on economies of scale and economies of scope gained across markets. In other words, the firm must be very big, it must be very large in order to gain economies of scale and economies of scope and thereby survive. If the organization or the firm is less than that, it will go out of business. So we have a particular definition of global industry, one that is related to size of the organization. I mentioned here, by the way, economies of scope. It's not something we often talk about. It does crop up in strategic planning and on classes on strategic planning, but we'll define it later in one of the slides coming up. But it is an important concept as well in this context. But essentially here the point is that some companies need global markets in order to survive. They must gain such economies of scale, they must gain a certain size of sales in order for them to survive. Now, global markets are international markets where products are largely standardized. Generally speaking, we get standardization across countries. We see the same products for sale in one country as the next. Because of the effects of selling the same product overseas, it means companies gain economies of scale. They're able to sell at a reduced price. They're able to make the product at an even smaller cost because of specialized machinery, mass production and so on. So it's not surprising we see the same products arising in or appearing in different countries. Global industries, well, competition is global. The same firms compete with each other everywhere. That's what we mean by global industries. Essentially, the same set of companies are in competition, and they're in competition right throughout the world in different markets. They're fighting it out, competing, if you like, domestically in one market, but they're also fighting it out overseas in many different markets simultaneously. Those are truly global companies. Also global industries, because sometimes, if you like, the cosmetics industry, it's well positioned in different economies, and the companies within the industry will be fighting it out for their positions. So those are global situations. There's also something we call multi-domestic industries. These are firms that compete in each national market independently of other national markets. It's as if the companies exist in different countries, but they're independent of each other. They're independent of the original company who set them up in the original domestic market. They're independent of companies in other countries who sell the same product essentially and make the same products for sales in the market and engage in the same processes. Yet they are, for all intents and purposes, independent. In general, businesses adopt a global strategy in global markets. That's when you have the same firms fighting it out everywhere. They have a global strategy in global markets and a multi-local strategy in multi-domestic markets. Multi-domestic markets means many national economies with companies in the various economies, but the companies acting independently of other countries, of other international companies who make the same product. So they're looking at local conditions and competing locally. So it's multi-local strategy, looking at different parts of the country, different segments of the market, drawing up their own marketing plans in the various countries and basing their production there as well, perhaps. They may still come under the umbrella of the original company, but they have the latitude, they have the freedom to produce in this way, to act independently. Now, global strategy, well, many companies pursue a global strategy. For example, Sony. This involves competing in many, if not all, countries, expanding wherever possible to give itself a presence in as many countries as possible. Understanding that success requires a presence in almost every part of the world. They are out to compete in every part of the world, fight for every market, and try to maximize its sales right across the globe. Making the product the same for each market, trying to gain economies of scale due to standardized production, standardized ways of marketing, standardized ways of making the products, and also sharing research and development costs. There is a centralized control of the company. For example, Sony, it's still controlled by the Sony Corporation, but the companies that operate in the various countries, they appear to be independent and seem to act independently of each other. Meeting customer needs and wants across national boundaries is what they're trying to do. They're trying to determine what customer needs are in different countries and trying to meet those needs by having a presence in that country and having specific marketing campaigns dealing with local issues, dealing with the population requirements of that country, and trying to sell into that country. But they're selling essentially standardized products, which of course means that the research and development cost is being shared out right across the world. Locating their value-adding activities where they can achieve the greatest competitive advantage. So they're always looking for the greatest competitive advantage where workers can be recruited quite cheaply, workers have talents and skills and are well educated. They're able to look for advantages right across the world and try to optimize their balance sheets right across the world in different countries with what appears to be independent companies, but all feeding back to a central company. Integrating and coordinating activities across boundaries is something they also try to do, but essentially they do try to keep an independence, but they will share and cooperate best practice, and they will have conferences and feedbacks of different situations on how situations were resolved and the learning process. So it does mean that the organization in total is a lot more efficient. A global strategy is effective when differences between countries are small and competition is global. So they try to meet the requirements of countries which have similar backgrounds and share the experiences within those, and at the same time recognizing that they've also got companies operating in radically different countries. So, for example, in the Baltic states, in Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia, they may have a particular approach to advertising, which will sensitively meet the requirements of those societies. But the same company operating in Africa will have a different approach to marketing. So the companies gain economies of scale. The centre certainly gains economies of scale because it's able to, as I said, share research and development costs. It's able to share best practice between all of its constituent parts right throughout the globe. So costs are lower as a consequence. And the coordination of activities, well, best practice is shared, as I said, and managers right throughout the world in the different companies under the same umbrella, the same parent umbrella, can meet and agree what is the best way to coordinate production, coordinate distribution, and give mutual support and aid to each other. There is a faster product development as a consequence of all of this, of course, which means the company is bringing new products to market more speedily than perhaps its competitors, giving it an added advantage. Now, the multi-domestic strategy, well, this involves products tailored to individual countries. So in this one, the company attempts to be more sensitive towards local markets and local market requirements. So products are developed and tailored to individual countries. Innovation comes from local research and development. Research and development, again, as I said, it's sensitized or sensitive to the requirements of the local people. It's problem solving on a local scale and bringing out products that are aimed at solving local needs. There is decentralization of decision making within the organization. The organization will have a top tier of management, but under that there will be a lot of delegation to different parts of the organization, again to try and work out what is the best way of producing and developing products for local parts of the market. So there tends to be local sourcing of labour and of capital, if possible, and also of logistics, distribution, and so on. So the company becomes more involved with the community and more embedded into that country. Now, the disadvantages of serving local needs are higher costs due to tailored products. Of course, the more specialized the products are to that society, the more expensive they are. The research and development and the development costs are not shared right across the globe, as in the case of the Sony example we just dealt with earlier. There could be duplication across countries as well, and of course that means that the product has been developed twice, and twice the costs of research and development, and that means that it could have been done a lot cheaper had there been greater collaboration and perhaps a different structure in place. Now, comparison of the two strategies. Well, 4 drivers determine the extent and nature of globalization in an industry. So there are 4 main drivers we need to consider when looking at globalization in an industry. First of all, there are the market drivers, similarity in customer needs, existence of global distribution networks, and transferable marketing. Now, if these exist, that will be a driver towards greater globalization. Similarity in customer needs, in other words, the same products can be marketed in different countries. The customers are similar. They have good distribution networks, global distribution networks. It's easy to get the product from one place to another. to meet customer requirements. And there is transferable marketing, that the marketing skills that have been built up in one centre can be transferred to another centre. There are also cost drivers. The potential for economies of scale, economies due to size. As companies get larger, average costs fall. The companies are able to get specialist machinery, buy raw materials cheaper, have specialist training programs for their workers. Economies of scale means an average falling cost. The average cost of production is falling, and of course companies may get too big, in which case there are coordination costs, managerial costs involved, which may put up the average cost of production. So there is an optimum size for companies, but economies of scale means average costs tend to fall over a certain range. Also, lower transportation costs. It may be possible to have economies in transportation. Location could be selected so there's good transportation, good road networks, good rail networks, shipping networks, airports, and so on. Product development costs could also be less in some countries where there's a highly skilled population, a highly educated population, but also one which is cheap to employ. And that means product development costs may be reduced. And economies of scope. Now, economies of scope is not something we talk about often. It should crop up in strategic marketing and in strategic planning. But it's not a topic we deal with a lot in our talks in these classes. So let's just have a slide, a digression, and have a slide on economies of scope. So this is a digression. So when a company makes 2 or more products and as a result has a lower average cost than if it had produced the products individually. So if a company makes 2 or more products and as a consequence has a lower average cost than if it had produced the products separately, that's an economy of scope. Now the reason for this is that the company is able to make more effective use of its assets. For example, McDonald's can produce French fries and burgers cheaper than if they were produced separately. That's because McDonald's are able to share refrigeration costs and perhaps some equipment costs and so on. So it's economy of scope. They're different products, but by making the 2 products, average cost is less than if the company made a single product. That's what we mean by economies of scope. Now, government drivers. Governments their activities may lead to globalisation. Trade policies, for example, market liberalisation, where there's reduced import tariffs and obstacles to trade. There could also be compatible technical standards and common marketing regulations. So certain countries are able to share economies because of technical standards or because of issues associated with products in different countries. Cars may have left-hand drive or right-hand drive, for example. So when countries share the same, there is an economy and they're likely to trade together. But also privatization, where governments are divesting themselves of state assets. So there's more emphasis on the market and there's a bigger signal to the private sector to become involved in those economies. And the last set of drivers, or the last driver, is competitive drivers. Domestic competition may force globalization. Where there's a lot of competition and the company is finding it difficult to survive, the company may simply move to another country so as to have a better competitive position, perhaps less competitors or even no competitors. So that may be a push towards globalisation. So in this session we've talked about the various pressures that lead to globalisation, the various policies that can be pursued, and the types of companies, be they global businesses or multi-domestic or whatever, the type of businesses and how they're formed and what are the pressures leading to their formation. And finally we looked at the various drivers towards globalisation. It's important that you go over this again and make your own notes and be familiar with all of these topics and understand the processes that's driving globalisation, a very important topic in today's world. But that's all we're going to deal with right now, so I'm going to leave it at that and say thank you for watching.